Thank you so much, Anna Maria, and thank you for the warm welcome, Berlin. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here speaking with you today, so thank you so much for inviting us so welcomely. So here we are talking about veganism, and yet only 8 years ago, we literally didn't even know what the word vegan was.
I remember on my 16th birthday, I had a photo taken with my father in the kitchen, and we were standing over a whole cooked, decorated pig. And I had a knife in one hand and a big smile on my face. And that was me, sweet 16. I used to say that salad and fruit were bird food. Real food for humans had to have meat. In fact, I used to work at the butcher's at a supermarket and packaged dismembered body parts.
And I used to flip burgers at McDonald's as a teenager. There's nothing I loved more than cooking up a barbecue. And I remember I used to pride myself on being able to eat a whole roast chicken in a work lunch break. All I wanted for my 30th birthday was a spit roasted lamb in the backyard. We also used to wear leather, including soft skin leather jackets made from baby deer, wool suits, coats and thermals. We owned down-filled sleeping bags. We had zoo memberships, and on holiday we went horse and elephant riding.
We used to feel sorry for vegetarians. Imagine a life without meat. The first time I met a vegetarian was in 2008. I worked with a lovely lady and she grew up on a farm. And one day we went out for lunch and I ordered a sausage roll. And she said to me, if you knew what happened to the animals to end up in that sausage roll, you wouldn't eat it. And I screwed up my face and I said, no, don't tell me. I don't want to know. And I ate the sausage roll.
A few months later, we remember eating a stack of different meats on a skewer and laughing with each other saying, look, we're eating a whole farm. Yeah. Later that same year, we're on holiday in Turkey, and we remember ganging up with two other meat eaters and mocking a vegetarian teenage girl at our hostel. She was eating pomegranate fruit for dinner, and she was pouring her heart out to us about how difficult it was living with her parents who didn't understand or support her.
She was vegetarian, and there we were, eating our lamb kebabs, loving them, and we were saying things like, we could never give up this taste, and the animals were already dead, so we may as well eat it.
Just 2 months after ganging up and mocking the vegetarian in Turkey, we went to live in an ashram in India for 3 months, and we had to eat a vegetarian diet.
The universe works in mysterious ways. Of course, we feared we would suffer from a protein and iron deficiency, so we loaded up on eating as much meat as we could leading up to going to the ashram.
Early on during our stay in the ashram, we recall complaining with another meat-eating couple about how we all felt lacking in energy, no doubt due to the anemia we were all developing.
I was so desperately missing the taste of animal flesh when we first arrived in the ashram that I remember we were trying to meditate and I would have images of dancing sausages and lamb chops going around my mind.
So obviously we fully intended to return to eating meat once we left the ashram. And then about halfway through our stay, something happened. One night we were shown a film that changed our lives. For the first time ever, we learned the truth about what happens to animals so that we can eat their flesh and the impact that it has on our health and the environment.
And we were shocked to our core. We weren't on social media back then, and we were heavily entrenched in meat-loving culture. And we literally had never seen or heard anything about animal agriculture. So there we were, sitting in a hall with about 300 other people. And at the end of that film, there was a rapturous applause from the audience, who were all mainly vegetarian. Well, we just sat there bug-eyed and in shock, and then we looked at each other and dropped an F-bomb.
The strongest emotion we felt in that moment was anger, for 2 reasons. Number one, how come we didn't know about this for 28 years? And number two, now we have to change our diet. We went back to our room that night and we both knew there wasn't even a decision to be made. We both knew that eating animal flesh was no longer even an option.
So when we returned home to Australia as vegetarians, of course our meat-loving families were totally shocked. And yet there was only one thing that separated us from our meat-loving families, and that was education. But when my grandmother asked me if we still eat eggs and cheese, I said, yes, of course we do. We'd never give up those foods. That would be going too far, and we'd already given up enough. In other words, we'd done our part.
Again, a lack of education about the egg and dairy industries kept us consumers of violence and ignorant to the truth. Because we weren't on social media back then, we didn't know that day-old baby male chicks are considered useless to the egg industry, including free-range, cage-free, organic, and higher welfare. And so they're ground up alive in an industrial macerator, or gassed to death, or thrown away in garbage bags to suffocate.
We didn't know that newborn baby calves are taken away from their mothers soon after birth so that humans can steal her milk, and the baby males are either killed within a few days or raised for veal and killed within 16 to 20 weeks.
We didn't know that egg-laying hens and milk-producing mother cows are all slaughtered for their meat anyway once the production of their secretions declines and they're no longer profitable to the industry and not worth keeping alive.
It wasn't until August the 26th, 2011, when we watched Gary Yourofsky's Best Speech You Will Ever Hear video on YouTube, that we learned how violent the egg and dairy industries are, and that we were still contributing to the misery and slaughter of billions of animals as vegetarians.
You see, we went vegetarian because we didn't want to exploit or kill animals. So in order to be morally consistent, we had to be vegan.
After watching that eye-opening speech on YouTube, again, there wasn't even a decision to make. We both knew that eating any animal products or using and exploiting animals in any way was no longer even an option. We were now vegan.
For us, going vegan was simply one of the most logical things we could do. As Australian animal rights activist and philanthropist Philip Wallen says, veganism is like the Swiss Army knife for many of the world's problems. This one simple change solves many of our ethical, health, and environmental problems.
For example, as many as 70 billion land animals and 2.7 trillion marine animals are killed worldwide each year for food alone.
We're currently growing enough crops to feed 10 billion people, and yet there are only 7.6 billion people on the planet. But around 1 billion people are suffering from starvation or malnourishment because we're feeding around half of the world's crops to food animals to fatten, whilst around 1 billion other people are suffering from obesity and obesity-related diseases largely caused by eating these animals and their secretions.
14 of the 15 leading causes of our death have been scientifically linked to eating animal products, including heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and some forms of cancer.
Animal agriculture is the leading cause of species extinction, ocean dead zones, water pollution, habitat destruction, and deforestation, including the fires that we're seeing in the Amazon at the moment, by the way. Animal agriculture also contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, water use, land use, desertification, and waste production. If we want to address environmental problems and sustainability, then animal agriculture is the elephant in the room.
Many of you will be familiar with the documentary film Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret. Dr. Richard Oppenlander was one of the film's lead environmental consultants, and we'd like to share with you now some excerpts from his excellent pre-Cowspiracy screening presentation to the EU Parliament.
You can watch his presentation on YouTube, and although it's from December 2015 and some of the figures may have changed, the points he made are still valid today. He said, the reason animal agriculture creates so many sustainability problems is quite simple. It's terribly inefficient, wasting resources, energy, and lives. But what you see in Cowspiracy the film is just the very tip of the iceberg. What the film does not spell out are the critical timelines that confront us, as well as the most destructive, insidious constraints that prevent us from proper evolution, including the pervasive misuse of the word sustainable itself.
It would take 1.5 to 2 full Earths to sustain what we are currently taking from and doing to our planet. We now know that the single sector most responsible for nearly all aspects of unsustainability combined, or what I call global depletion, is that of animal agriculture, the meat, dairy, and fishing industries.
Today, we're floating around precariously in a zone or state that I call pseudo-sustainability, never getting to where we need to be, but thinking that we are sustainable. This is a very dangerous situation.
And for anyone who believes that eating any animal products is sustainable, then it's time to understand the concept of optimal or optimal relative sustainability. How sustainable is it to produce and consume any animal products in a relative sense as compared to plant-based foods?
Eating only local food will not solve the problem, because it's not the size of the farm or the miles traveled that causes the problem. It's the type of food being produced.
This sustainability issue will not be solved simply by advocating eating less meat, which is subjective, inconsistent with the magnitude and urgency of the problem, and perpetuates irresponsibility with every bite taken.
And it mistakenly shifts the focus to seafood. Regarding our oceans, the damage we've done is irreversible in our lifetime. And today, there is no such thing as sustainable seafood, especially if you apply the three key factors of how that word sustainable is defined by the fishing industry itself.
And contrary to what everybody would like to believe, eating grass-fed or organic pastured livestock will not solve the problem either. It'll make matters worse. More land use changes, more deforestation, more methane produced, and a higher feed conversion ratio.
It also must be clearly understood that this is not an industrial or factory farm issue. It's a raising animals to eat issue. Farm to table and climate smart agriculture are new catchwords and terms. But these new food movements only make sense if you use our dwindling natural resources to grow plants for direct human consumption. Again, these were just some excerpts from Dr. Oppenlander's talk, and we recommend everybody watch the full video on YouTube.
Dr. Oppenlander's critical timeline warnings were echoed last year in a landmark report released by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. The world's leading climate scientists warned that there is only a dozen years for global warming to be kept to a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which even half a degree will significantly worsen the risks of drought, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people.
And at a General Assembly this year, the UN warned that we're heading towards irreversible damage from climate change. Recycling, shorter showers, and reusable straws are not going to solve this problem. Changing our diet is the most impactful thing we can do for the planet and certainly for the animal victims.
And whilst around 98 or 99% of animal exploitation happens for food, animals are also exploited for clothing, entertainment, testing, and in the pet industry. But animals are not commodities for us to dominate and use as we like. They are not here for us. They are here with us. They're not something. They're someone. They are individuals with personalities and desires, and they have a right to live their life as they would like to, just the way we do.
We're all vegan at heart because we avoid hurting animals and we care for their well-being. Most motorists will brake suddenly or swerve to avoid hitting birds on the road, and yet they're probably eating other birds like chickens.
Back home, we live in an apartment building, and one of our neighbours is a dog sitter. And every morning we will watch people drive in their cars to the apartment building to drop off their dogs to be babysat for the day. So they're spending their hard-earned money on a babysitter for their dogs, and that's how much they care about the well-being of these animals. But that very same morning, before they drop the dogs off, they may have eaten bacon, eggs, and milk for breakfast. And the dog sitter herself took special delight in telling us, the only vegans in the building, just how much she enjoyed eating ham over Christmas.
Growing up, one of my family's dogs was a Jack Russell named Susie, and I remember playing a ball game with her one day and I accidentally knocked her in the head. And when she yelped in pain, my stomach dropped. I felt so bad because I couldn't explain to the sweet little girl that she'd done nothing wrong and that it was just an accident. Meanwhile, I was causing unimaginable suffering to all manner of other animals by what I was eating, wearing, and using.
So when people say they love animals, what they mean is they love some animals in our lives, like our companion animals, our cats and dogs, those that we live with, and they're members of our families. But they also love the taste of other animals. And you don't have to love animals to know it's wrong to unnecessarily kill them. I was never an animal lover. I was actually scared of animals, petrified of cats, but I never thought of hurting them. Just like not everybody is a people person, so we might not love all people, but that doesn't justify us killing them. Being vegan is not about loving animals. It's about respecting them.
Veganism is simply about aligning our actions with our ethics. If we all value peace, compassion, justice, respect, and love, then we need to follow through and make sure that our actions 3 times a day when we sit down to eat are peaceful, compassionate, just, respectful, and loving. And that means not paying someone else to needlessly exploit and kill innocent animals for meat, dairy, and eggs.
After all, the golden rule is to do unto others as you would have done unto you. And if we wouldn't want what we do to animals to be done to us, then we shouldn't be doing it to them.
And the reason why good people who love the animals in their homes can pay for such violent things to happen to other animals by industries is because of something called speciesism. For anyone unaware of the term, speciesism is another form of discrimination, like racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, ageism, classism, etc. It's where we see ourselves as superior to non-human animals. And we see some animals like cats, dogs, dolphins, whales, tigers, etc. as superior to other non-human animals like cows, pigs, chickens, ducks, turkeys, fish, sheep, goat, etc. But we are all equal in our capacity to suffer as animals.
Back to our vegan story in 2011. So as soon as we finished watching that video, the speech on YouTube, we sent an email to everybody in our contacts list telling them that we had just come across this life-changing and life-saving information, and we felt a moral obligation to share it with them all. Let's just say we had a mixture of responses, but the main thing that we heard from people was nothing. The majority of people did not respond or react at all.
That was 8 years ago, and we haven't stopped speaking up for animals since. Now, we can all advocate for animals in many, many different ways, and we're going to talk about some of those ways a little later on.
One of the things we've noticed when doing outreach as part of our animal rights activism is that we hear the same excuses from non-vegans over and over. No matter where we are around the world, people seem to think that vegans eat grass and will soon die of a protein deficiency.
People all over the world think they are apex predators who just wouldn't know what to do with their canine teeth if they bought a can of beans instead of a neatly packaged piece of chicken from the supermarket that they drove to in the car and paid for with their credit card.
And yet, these very same apex predators will be against the dog meat trade in Asia and against the live exports of animals to the Middle East. So it begs the question, if there's nothing wrong with killing and eating animals, then why are people so concerned about which animals are being killed and eaten and how those animals are being transported to a slaughterhouse?
A lot of the objections we hear from not yet vegans when we're outreaching are based around culture, tradition, and taste. Yes, every culture involves exploiting and eating animals. It's what the majority of people have grown up doing, and it's been normalized because everyone around them is doing it.
Of course, food is part of many traditions that we love. In Australian culture, it's tradition to eat lamb on Australia Day, to celebrate over a baby corpse on the barbecue. In some cultures, it's tradition to stuff seasoned bread into the anus of a bird, cook, and eat it. That's called a Christmas turkey. We've normalized these acts, but if we stop to think about it for just a moment, the acts themselves are not normal. And we can see this more clearly when we simply change the victims of the violence. Who would think it's normal to barbecue puppies on Australia Day? Or stuff bread into the anus of a Christmas flamingo?
Just because we've been doing something for a long time, does that make it right? Do we have to continue doing the wrong thing? Can't we still have traditions involving food, but using real food, actual food, and not the dismembered body parts and secretions of innocent animals? How about creating traditions based on compassion instead of violence?
And perhaps the single greatest objection that non-vegans have is taste. No matter how much time we spend talking to people about the ethics, they always seem to be more concerned about taste. But does sensory pleasure justify violence? The 5 minutes that it takes us to eat the flesh or secretions of an animal will cost them their entire lives. The great thing is, contrary to popular belief, vegans don't eat grass. We can eat the same thing as non-vegans, but made from plants.
Another interesting thing to see when we're outreaching is that parents don't like their children watching slaughterhouse footage that we're screening. So many people will pull their children away from the screens or cover their eyes or take the long way around the demonstration to avoid the screens altogether.
And it's not just parents doing this to protect their children, adults do this all the time. The number one thing I hear from people walking past is, I can't watch that. Now I'm confused. I thought we were apex predators.
If there's nothing wrong with what goes on inside a slaughterhouse, then why do people avoid watching it? Why do parents try to hide it from their children? Because there is something very, very wrong with what goes on inside a slaughterhouse. Slaughter happens.
And most people do not want to watch animals being slaughtered for two reasons. Number one, it's disgusting and sickening. Watching terrified animals try to escape a brutal execution is not pleasant. Hearing their screams, seeing them struggle to break free, and then the final moment when the blade is drawn across their throat and seeing the blood gushing out, it's absolutely sickening and heartbreaking to watch. And the second reason people avoid watching slaughterhouse footage is because they know it's sickening and heartbreaking. And if they watch it, they'll be turned off their food. They'll feel bad about paying for that violence. They won't want to eat it, and it will start them down the path of veganism.
And the problem is, many people don't want to go down the path of veganism. They want to continue eating animal flesh and secretions, they love the taste, and they don't want to feel bad about it. So they will choose to remain willfully ignorant and continue paying for violence they can't even bring themselves to watch.
They will continue to feed that violence to their children, continue indoctrinating them into carnism, an ideology where eating, wearing, and using animals is considered normal, natural, and necessary. But they won't dare let their kids see where their hot dogs and hamburgers come from.
This is the insanity of the situation that we've created here on planet Earth. And we get it. We used to be part of it too. I remember 16 years ago, before we got married, we were looking for somewhere to live together. I found an apartment that I wanted to see, and I remember picking Natasha up from work one night and driving us to this place. But I didn't tell her where it was.
I thought it was an exciting surprise. But I realized why Luca didn't tell me where it was as we drove into the entrance and I felt bump, 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 bump. We had driven over what I instantly knew was a cattle guard. They had turned the site of a former slaughterhouse into an apartment complex. I screamed, "Get us out of here!" I got chills. I felt like the energy instantly changed. It was like a horror movie, and I would never want to live there.
Again, if there's nothing wrong with what happens in a slaughterhouse, then why did Natasha react like that as a meat eater? And why did I have to hide the location from her? We didn't want to live there for the same reasons parents take their children apple picking and not to a slaughterhouse. The horrors of what we do to animals is too much to bear, and people will avoid the truth as much as possible.
So how do people balance not wanting to hurt animals with continuing to eat animals? They buy the humane lie, just like we did back in 2006. That's when we first started to make changes to our diet. We bought expensive meat from an organic butcher, cage-free eggs, and organic milk. The animal agriculture industry told us that was better for our health and it was better for the animals. And we genuinely thought we were doing the best thing possible. We were good people paying for expensive animal flesh and secretions.
In reality, thinking that we can humanely eat animals and their secretions is the industry's best sold lie. Humane means to have or show compassion or benevolence. In what universe is slitting someone's throat and chopping their head off showing compassion or benevolence? Lowering pigs into a gas chamber until they're rendered unconscious before slaughtering them is considered the most humane practice by the industry, despite the pigs thrashing around in agony and screaming. Animals bred for food do not go willingly to their executions. They don't sign a contract agreeing to be on our plates in exchange for a larger cage or organic feed.
It's not about improving conditions. It's about not putting animals in those conditions in the first place. It's not about better stunning practices to render animals unconscious before slaughtering. It's about not slaughtering them at all. Humane meat, dairy, and eggs is an industry lie created to make consumers feel better, but there is no better way to do the wrong thing.
When we show people farming and slaughterhouse footage, the majority will say things like, "It's not like that in this country. There's a better way to do it." Factory farming is wrong. The law should stop this. And the majority of people also don't know that what they're watching is standard, legal industry practice across large and small farms all around the world.
All these animals, no matter what farm they were raised on or how good the conditions may have been, are all sent to the same place, a slaughterhouse, and they all suffer the same fate, having their throats slit and their heads chopped off.
I think one of the main reasons humans do what we do to animals is because we have separated ourselves from other animals. We think we're so different and we only focus on those differences. But it's important to remember that we're animals too.
All animals, humans and non-human animals, feel emotions. We all avoid pain and danger, and we seek joy and love. We all avoid discomfort and seek pleasure. We all want to feel safe and have the capacity to suffer. We all have families and friends that we value and want to spend time with. We all desire to live our lives the way we want, in freedom and peace.
And because we have so many similarities, none of us would want to go through what we do to non-human animals. We wouldn't want to be forcibly impregnated and have our babies stolen. We wouldn't want to be tested on or have our skin ripped off. We wouldn't want to be used and exploited for the entertainment of others. We wouldn't want to have our bodies mutilated through branding, clippings, and castration.
We wouldn't want to be selectively bred so someone else can make more money from selling our body parts and secretions. We are all earthlings, and when we focus on the similarities we have with non-human animals, we can bridge the gap we have created in our minds between different species.
There is only one reason why any of what we do to animals happens, and that is because people buy it. We demand, industry supplies, and animals die. We know a lot of people think that going vegan is hard, and yet we ask this: what's harder, substituting animal products for plant-based products, or pushing the button on a grinder to shred live baby chicks? If we couldn't press that button, then we shouldn't be paying someone else to press it for us. And the same goes for shooting animals in the head and slitting their throats.
We pay other people to do the dirty work because we love the taste of steak and cheese too much. But how many people would be willing to work in a slaughterhouse? How many people would encourage their children to work in a slaughterhouse? The same way we encourage our children to work as teachers, doctors, and musicians.
Instead, when children hurt animals, we're concerned about their mental health and we assess them for violent behavior. But when children grow up and want to be vegan and they don't want to hurt animals, they're told they're extremist, annoying, and probably won't survive.
So what can we do in this confusing world? We can do what our head and heart know is the most compassionate and logical thing to do. We choose to be vegan. Despite what some people might say, it's not extreme to not kill unnecessarily. To learn more about how extreme what we do to animals is, please watch the film Dominion for free on YouTube.
The other thing we can do is become animal rights activists. Why does taking action for animals matter? Well, as our tagline says, going vegan is not the most we can do. It's the least we can do. And what we mean by that is not breeding, mutilating, sexually assaulting, and slitting the throats of animals unnecessarily is literally the least we can do. Not participating in violence and exploitation is great, but actively trying to stop the violence and exploitation is what the victims need. We always encourage people to think about how you can veganize your skills, jobs, interests, passions, hobbies in any way that you can.
Some examples of things and jobs people have veganized include documentaries, books, magazines, speeches, and translating all of those things. Websites, apps, podcasts, social media, virtual summits, conferences, music, art, dance, event planning, holiday tours, food trucks, cafes, restaurants, meal delivery services. There are vegan doctors, nutritionists, psychologists, politicians, and lawyers. School and university students can write essays, give presentations, have debates on veganism, and organize screenings of vegan documentary films and invite guest speakers.
Now, although we can take action for animals in many, many different ways, two of the main forms are traditional or street activism and social media activism. And the fusion of the two is extremely efficient and effective.
Just in the 8 years that we've been vegan, we've noticed huge changes in the vegan and animal rights movements. Most importantly, the time between somebody becoming vegan and becoming an activist is getting less and less. And that's because social media has popularized and normalized activism to such a degree that being vegan and being an activist is becoming more and more synonymous.
Participation in animal rights activism has experienced exponential growth in recent years, driven primarily by social media and spearheaded by 3 worldwide grassroots animal rights organizations: Anonymous for the Voiceless, the Save Movement, and Direct Action Everywhere. And we encourage people to join their local chapters for each group.
Of course, there are many other groups around the world doing similar activism. However, these 3 organizations have been the most successful in terms of global participation.
Anonymous for the Voiceless has popularized Cube of Truth style demonstrations involving showing slaughterhouse and other animal exploitation footage in public and having outreach conversations with not yet vegans on the street. Through thousands of their powerful Cube of Truth demonstrations in around 1,000 cities, they've convinced hundreds of thousands of people to take veganism seriously, and millions more have watched outreach conversations posted on social media. There is a Cube of Truth demonstration happening here today at the Vegan Sommerfest at 4:15 p.m, so please join us for that.
The Save movement started in Toronto in 2010 and has since grown exponentially to over 600 chapters in more than 60 countries. People bear witness at vigils to animals on transport trucks outside slaughterhouses, as well as on farms and other locations of animal exploitation.
Outside slaughterhouses, generally speaking, activists try to stop the trucks transporting animals for a few minutes to offer the animals some love and compassion before their execution, but also to document what they see with their phone and share it on social media to help not yet vegans see the truth and make a change.
Is this effective? Well, the animal agriculture industry is telling us yes. You see, the most powerful weapon we have as activists lives in our pocket. This simple tool is what will help us bring down the animal agriculture empire.
Industry is so desperate to stop activists from obtaining footage of the animals and to keep the truth hidden from consumers that many slaughterhouses try to stop activists from bearing witness.
The industry's response to activists at vigils tells us a great deal. Social media is where we can reach consumers, educate them, and help change consumer demands. Now, we can try to create that social change that we want by trying to change the individuals in society one by one. And yet, if we rely solely on this approach to activism, it's simply going to take too long to change society's dominant ideologies of speciesism and carnism, both of which we spoke about earlier.
Therefore, we also need to do activism that focuses on creating faster social change. And this is where direct action comes in. Now, direct action, which can be violent or non-violent, has been used by social justice movements throughout history. Movements that have used non-violent direct action have been more successful because most people typically don't want to be involved with violence, and with violence, we lose the moral high ground.
Non-violent direct action is also known as civil resistance, which is recognized as a fundamental human right under international law. However, non-violent direct actions are sometimes a form of civil disobedience, which is the active refusal to obey certain laws. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote that one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws.
He also wrote that the goal of non-violent direct action is that it seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. I think we could agree that the issue of animal rights has been ignored for far too long by the not yet vegan majority, right?
Today in the animal rights movement, the organisation Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE, has popularised non-violent direct action around the world. The aim is to create social change by forcing society's attention to the issue of animal rights, by forcing a social debate about animal rights. It doesn't matter what people are saying about animal rights, we just want them saying something about animal rights. We need to force them to acknowledge the issue, to think about the issue, and to take a position on the issue. And as Wayne Shung from DXE says, we must force the issue because we know we can win the debate.
Anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And in fact, political scientist Erica Chenoweth proved this. Her research on hundreds of previous social justice movements revealed what she calls the rule of 3.5%, whereby whenever 3.5% of a population were engaged in sustained, non-violent, direct action, that movement won every single time.
One of the major obstacles the animal rights movement faces, however, is that it's estimated that only around 1% of vegans are activists, and even less than 1% are engaged in sustained, non-violent direct action. The solution to this is for every single person here to first live vegan, and secondly, to make sure they are active for animals, and more specifically, to be involved in non-violent direct action, and to educate and inspire other people to also take part in non-violent direct action. And I know that sounds like a lot and impossible, but if vegans don't take direct action for animals, then who will?
Whatever form of animal rights activism you choose to get involved in, we urge people to post it on social media. To be honest with you, many years ago, we hated the idea of social media and we didn't even want to get on Facebook. But two things changed our minds.
Firstly, if one of the first YouTube videos we ever watched turned us vegan, then this was a very powerful tool that clearly worked. The second reason was that we noticed everybody was on their devices, watching and scrolling and watching and scrolling. And we said to each other, well, they're watching something, so we might as well get on this thing and they can watch us and learn about veganism. So we're on social media not because we like it, but because it works.
It's the most efficient and effective tool that we know of that directly reaches the most number of consumers and creates powerful change.
For example, you could have one experience as an activist, such as an outreach conversation, or perhaps you're filming some pigs on a truck, and that experience could just stay with you, or you could upload that online and potentially reach and influence tens or hundreds or thousands or even millions of other people.
And not only are you reaching consumers, but you're also reaching not yet active vegans and encouraging them to get active and to create and share content.
So we don't have to wait for industry, governments, or any other institution to change things. We are the ones we've been waiting for to create the change that's needed for animals and the planet.
We may each just be a drop in the ocean. But what is an ocean but a multitude of drops? One to change a few to change the many, many to change the world. It all starts with one.
Be the one to make a change today.
Because as we always say, going vegan is not the most we can do.
It's the least we can do. Thank you so much, Berlin.
Thank you. Thank you. That's